Hey guys, quick intro for the very, very long video that I made a little longer than I really should have. So, few things are new editing technique. So, there could be a lot of cut sentences. I tried to do something a little bit more streamlined than spending what would have been probably about 7 hours editing. So, hopefully things sound alright. If they don't, let me know. Maybe I can try and clarify, at least in the comments down below. Stuff like that. And then for more update on what the channel is going to be doing after this, since I'm pretty much done with reviewing the Pokédex for Pokemon Sage, stay tuned till the end of the video. I'll talk about that there. Hopefully you enjoy.
The Foliette line looks amazing as it is. It's a great example of grass starter. The one tiny correction I think I would change would be Florabee's wings. I would give it a smaller set of secondary wings to foretell of Floresum's secondary wings. The colors work perfectly here, and the bright red cheeks immediately draw attention to Florabee's main facial features, and the pink is a great accent to that red color. Kidling's line is my favorite starter. Even though it relies heavily on reds and oranges, it distinguishes itself from other fire types. It follows a very similar color philosophy as Charmander. Its middle evolution has a different hue than the other two, but is still represented in the final form. I love how the horns grow and mature over time, and eventually the final's headpiece is a great accessory for Flareys. I find that some of the other older designs are interesting, but I do think that we got the best out of the designs that I saw. One tiny change that I would do is have Pyrote's neck fluff better represent the speed that this Pokemon is known for. Aguade's line is pretty interesting itself. The idea of salt formations on a iguana is pretty unique and gives a great Pokemon idea to an existing natural phenomenon. Again, with this line we have some interesting ideas of how this salt should be used, but in the final form I'm glad to see that it emphasizes the growths on its head, which is pretty interesting, and the arms and legs showcase a more attack-focused creature. It is a great representation of the fighting type because of that. Harpy's line is an interesting case. I find the starter, the first stage, Harpy itself, to be quite adorable and unique. It fits very well with the existing first stage bird Pokemon. The same can be said for the second stage. Aquilor holds references of its own, has a unique design, enough to stand out from other Pokemon. But Warquia is too similar to Braviary, which came out a few years before Sage's conception. Warquia seem to have a lot of variants that just extend the classes that Aquilor already has, and I found those way more intriguing as it set itself apart from Braviary. I also think that the spot on Warquia's wings would be very interesting to have as a sort of reference to the Mitsubishi Zero. Maybe because of that, the bird would be taken more as a offensive and very weak defensively Pokemon. Overall, great concept, and if it wasn't for Braviary, this line would be an amazing addition to Pokemon as a whole. Kepig, however, stands by itself very uniquely. It is one of the few Pokemon that are item-based that I truly, truly love. It's mixed between a guinea pig, a capybara, and a chulo makes this line very adorable. Though a lot of the alternative designs are unique by themselves, none of them scream Pokemon as much as the final evolutions do, and I couldn't see any of the other ones in games other than the ones that we got. Cub-Zero is very plain as opposed to Kepig. Its inspiration of a lynx with a saber-toothed tiger is unique enough to hold a line, especially of only 2 Pokemon, but I find that its ice representation is rather lacking, other than the saber-tooths that are pure icicles. I think its paws should be reinforced with ice rather than being speckled on its main body, much like Avalynx's claws are made out of ice, but a more glove or shoe representation, maybe going up the leg as a boot, much like its furthest left alternate iteration. Speaking of, some of the alternates do look cool, and I think that they would also work as Pokemon. In fact, part of me wants the smaller evolution of the rightmost duo and the final of the leftmost to be the line itself. To me, they could show more character that way than the somewhat overly plain Pokemon that we have here. Plus, I like the duality of the rightmost looking more kind of like a small show dog, and the leftmost being a almost war beast, and that evolution could show a real growth in power. The fawning line. Before researching this, I had no idea what a water deer was, and that shows a great strength of Pokemon, to bring out unique and interesting species from around the world and give them a more mainstream showing. Because of that, I love the fangs that each of these three have, and I'm glad that they kept the strange fangs that the water deer have throughout the entire line. I think this line does age progression extremely well, going from what seems like a child to maybe a teen to an elder. Time is surely not forgotten. However, I think that the teen also represents the awkward phase, as the blue shape on its body makes it look awkwardly round, and perhaps that it's wearing limbs as a jacket and its main body is just a floating orb. I think that the secondary evolution on the right-hand side of the alternate art would have been better, mainly because I also don't like the top fluff of fur that La Marche has. The art is interesting, and if you wanted to go for more of an adult feel for Buxton rather than an elder, I also think that the right-hand art would be amazing. Pangolith itself looks cute enough. Panglacier, on the other hand, looks overly designed. It looks almost chaotic in its nature. Perhaps I'll take the time and make an alternate with just a few changes to the final art, but as it stands, Panglacier really ruins this line for me. Now, I couldn't find any alternate art for these two, which is a real shame, considering that up to this point, Panglacier is the Pokemon with the most problems design-wise in my eyes. Pangolith looks cute and adorable with little arms made out of snow. Its pointed head is pretty easily offset by its rounded legs, and shape-wise I think it's interesting. Panglacier has a lot of spikes, which isn't itself a bad thing, but for a Pokemon that's so bottom-heavy and inspired by ice and rock, I don't expect it to be anything else but broken chunks of rock, if that. Another thing would be that the snow on Panglacier's head seems to be forming a crystal shape, but it doesn't show that in color, only in texture, which would be hard to come across in sprite form, I would guess. The Bluffin line. An absolutely adorable line. I love the mix of purple and yellow that come almost out of nowhere for these two. Being ice and flying, the white and light blue work perfectly well with each other, but those standout colors really make the design pop. And I'm glad that it seems the alternate art was trying to take this into consideration. The stripes and the diverging tails that Bermudale itself seem to show off have a sense of regality and gives this Pokemon more of a high power feeling, while Bluffin seems to be more adorable and up for adventure. I really loved the alternative art for this line, from the Gen 1 inspiration or take on the final Bermudale design, to the very bird-like, almost secondary evolution between the two in the top right-hand corner of the alternate art, and the different colors that the bottom right-hand seem to have, which also work well for the line. I do, however, think that the purple really makes the regality of Bermudale stand out on its own. Coblin, based on a Cobalt, which seem to be very integrated in D&D lore, are cave dwellers. So it makes sense that this first split evolution line develop into a blind ground sensing creature, or develop a torch on the back of their tail. Now, by itself, I think Cobalt is the weakest design-wise in this line, as nothing really stands out apart from maybe its tongue, while Coblin's eyes and Cobras's tail and red body in general stand out very nicely. Cobalt's darker colors only really pop with its white arms and tail. That's not a bad thing by itself, but couple that with the two-shade body, and the design seems more like a prototype than a final design. That being said, I appreciate that the split evolution is so different from each other, as the bottom right-hand alternate art just have a color change that seems more in line with shinies rather than a split evolution. The Peblosa line. This line in particular probably changed the most between my first reaction and the secondary reaction. If I'm not mistaken, I thought it was relatively good, but the second and third evolutions seems a little too similar. I think you can remedy that with just a simple fix. The alternate art in the bottom left-hand corner shows Peblosa being without its neck brace, and I think that design is super adorable. And if you replace the almost solid-looking rock on Tetraterra's neck from the second evolution, it would show a more progressive change between the three. You could keep most of the same aspects on each of their bodies, but that small change would probably ease the progression in this line and make it more diverse from each other. I also find it kind of curious how they would portray gastroliths, animals that swallow rocks to help digest their food, as an anteater with rocks around it. I would have thought that you would have these Pokemon in a more active action eating rocks to help show part of their inspiration. If it wasn't for their fandom page directly calling that out, I would have thought it was just an anteater wearing rocks. Nothing else. Coati. Again, a second creature that I had never heard of before, a Coati. Its real-life counterpart is interesting enough for a Pokemon, I'd think. And the final design that we got looks amazing. I appreciate its flat tail despite having a more cylindrical one in the real creature. Almost looks like a beaver in that sorts. I would be interested in seeing how an anime would represent its tail signal and how that would be even portrayed. Does each and every object give off a varying frequency that Coati just happened to be able to interpret? Snome has grown on me as I've done this research. The Ice Ball duo are almost endearing, and so much better of a human-like Pokemon than Mr. Mime and Jinx ever were. The big burly arms on Snoger's design give it an interesting body shape that I don't think many Pokemon have. A very short but strong design. And as many of you know, from my first reactions, I do appreciate when a baby Pokemon better represents a rounder shape, because it gives off a more cutesy vibe. I had to include this alternate art of the first evolution Snome, the middle, as though it could be a different first evolution. It seems more rebellious, like a secondary evolution, than anything else. That being said, I'm still very happy that this line is only 2, as I don't think a middle evolution would do anything but complicate the designs and inspirations. Tamarin and Orangutau. Now, I had heard the name Tamarin before, but after looking up a picture, I find it super adorable. And I think that both of these take that glorious mustache and beard combo it has and runs with it quite well. Just adding it onto Orangutan seems to work wonders as well. And to represent mysticism by the symmetry that both of these share is quite nice. Unfortunately, this was another line where I couldn't find any alternate art. I would have loved to see Orangutau in a different position that makes it seem less symmetrical. Tamarin gets away with this because of its curling tail and offset feet. If it wasn't for that, it would look almost plain and straight on. Though I guess Orangutau is trying to portray a design balance and a posture balance. Larva Bidet. As a big Gen 3 fan, I always thought that the split evolution of Wurmple was a great design choice. You're never quite sure which design or which route your Pokemon will go in that instance. Be it this was before I knew about natures. The different inspirations of a Bombardier Beetle, Firefly, and Hard-shelled Beetle are greatly different, but keep a general face look of Larva Bidet intact, which help connect the lines together. The unique eyebrows on all of them too are a feature that I absolutely love in this line. It always seems that those eyebrows are sticking out no matter which Pokemon you're talking about. Because of that, some of the alternate art I just couldn't see as being part of this line. Even the Carajoule, where it looks like an outlet for a head, just doesn't seem right without the very 90-degree eyebrows that the current iteration has. I do think Larva Bidet could use a little bit of a design change. It might be a little too simple compared to its other counterparts. Maybe make it a more conical shape rather than a ball connected to a tail.
but it also looks simple enough to be a first stage that is relatively adorable. By the way, that larva picture just gives me shivers every time I look at it. Mooseberry is yet another Sage Pokemon that I couldn't find any alternate art for. And that's a lot of the art that I've found for Mooseberry and Moosebushel don't change things up enough for me to include it in here. And they really had a problem with keeping my main issue of Mooseberry intact. I find that it is too mouse-like. If you take a look at all the other mouse Pokemon, or Pikachu clones in the Pokemon world, they all have very rounded faces, very exaggerated tails and bodies. This Mooseberry seems more like a cartoon mouse than a Pokemon mouse. That being said, I find its design inspiration to be quite intriguing, and I love the ankylosaur tail that it has. The only small problem I have with Moosebushel is I'm not sure how I feel about the hairs on its face. It might be more adorable without them. But apart from that, I absolutely love Moosebushel's design. Baratel was kind of a trip to look at its alternate art. In all of the artwork, all I could think about was Yogi Bear. Especially this middle artwork here. To me, it just screams Yogi after he had a spoiled picnic basket. But I'm glad that the final art seems to be a little bit more cocky. Seems to be more of a bad boy rather than Yogi himself. And I'm glad that the Pokedex isn't so violent as to say Baratel just massacres Mooseberries and Moosebushels. They can coexist with each other. But with its Honey Badger inspiration, as long as it serves Baratel, I don't see Baratel caring unless it doesn't get what it wants. Gromio. It completely missed me when I first reacted to these Pokemon, but Gromio and Tuliep are heavily inspired by Romeo and Juliet, along with Montague and the Capulet family. Initially, I thought Gromio was more of a dandelion spreading its seeds, while its evolution was a dandelion in full bloom. However, it also seems that Gromio is inspired by the male parts in flowers. If I'm not mistaken, the part that produces and ejects the pollen, while Tuliep is the female part of a flower. Gromio's art could do some work, but design-wise, I think it would be better if Gromio had a fro covering its eyes only to show a worried mouth. The leaf dress that it seems to have could help it seem more proper by adding sleeves. Perhaps long sleeves, so you could change the yellow bulbs at the end of its arms to be 3 fingers poking out of a very long sleeve. Perhaps a shirt that looks too big for Gromio to be wearing. And as it evolves, those 3 fingers develop into the fluff that Montague has on its wrists. Tuliep and Capulili are honestly really nice designs. Tuliep in particular looks absolutely adorable, and I'm surprised that I like the design of a Pokemon with almost nothing on its head, and a very simple design for a face. But again, the rounded nature of baby Pokemon probably endears it in my eyes. Capulili, I think it works well as a Pokemon, but I'm not the biggest fan of its head. And in the Pokedex, it almost seems like a wireframe face instead of a bulb with petals around it. But I appreciate the lopsidedness of the bulbs representing a big ol' floppy hat of olden days, and the dress that is made from the leaves on Capulili is very nice. A very nice touch. Dreamdeary and Macabra are a very interesting bunch, as they do not evolve into each other as I believe I thought they did. However, that is almost by design. Because of this design, I could have very well interpreted the alternate art to be of the other and not the one that I assigned it on. It's very complicated to tell in the files that I got. Dreamdeary is a very interesting case, as it is supposed to be luring you in with a false sense of security. Its cuteness making you lower your guard, as it devours your dreams and leaves you disoriented and fatigued. Perhaps its black wool is representing its black heart. Design-wise, I find it interesting how Dreamdeary basically just gets darker the closer to its head that you look, but the color of orange helped bring the design a consistency, as the shade of orange never changes, and it's in all 3 layers of gray it seems to wear.
Its adorable art makes it a little strange when you read its Pokedex. That does, however, add to its appeal. The mystery of how it's able to portray itself so kindly makes me like this Pokemon more, and I'm glad that it didn't go with one of the alternate designs that make it look more threatening. They also kind of look like a second or third stage evolution, and I'm happy that Dreamdury is only one. However, its counterpart takes this creepy nature, despite it being the good guy in this duality. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing, or perhaps a sheep in wolf's clothing, as it hunts humanity's dream devourers. Lore-wise, I have a slight problem as the color of Dreamdury's wool changes from black to white. Perhaps it really does represent the color of one's soul, perhaps? I just find it hilarious how it's supposed to be using Dreamdury's wool as a disguise, yet it looks almost nothing like the Pokemon itself. The bright red, white, and yellow hardly come across at all when you try and think of Dreamdury. The only connection it seems to have is the golden on its wrists and horns. Part of me thinks that this duo could have worked in a two-stage evolution sort of fashion, as the top, almost middle alternate art seems to imply. Perhaps the older Macabre that look more like wolves know better and have experienced more dreams than the little ones that only hunger. With that, these wolf-like Macabros could put the Dreamduries in line. But with that said, there is a sort of charm to Pokemon who look like they could be in the same species, but work off of each other. The direct comparison that I think of would be Plusle and Minun. They work better as two solo stages than a split evolution of sorts. Speaking of split evolutions, the Kertruffle line, being inspired by fairy rings, bioluminescence, and poisonous mushrooms. I appreciate what this line was going for, but the grassy hills are too similar for my tastes. I think Mushroom could have stayed part of the split evolution, and I think that Parishroom has some really interesting aspects. Perhaps Kertruffle could have evolved into one of the screaming red-capped mushrooms on Parishroom instead of the hill itself. Lumishroom has been a sticking point in my mind, as I can't decide whether it's good, bad, or plain. Its fabulous mustache, along with a dozen pairs of eyes on its back, is a really strange combination that I'm not entirely sure differentiates itself enough from its two counterparts. Even in my redesign scenario, I don't know how I would represent a bioluminescent mushroom. I just don't think that this split evolution should have stayed on hills. It makes the line look more like a seasonal variant than a split evolution. Rocano might be the most average Pokemon that I have seen up to this point, being that I find its first evolution to be very cutesy for a strange inspiration, and its final evolution to look imposing enough to warrant having in battle. Its middle evolution being awkward and somewhat mixed between the two, and it doesn't quite pull off either quite right. I like how its arms are flowing lava, and they cool and harden on Volkholder's arms, but take away the specks of black in its design, and it looks very plain. Perhaps there should be more layers incorporated into the volcano on Volcarok. I do think that the whole line could have used some black armor plating that looks like freshly cooled lava. Having wavy black coloring could make the colors pop, especially around the lava itself. A similar shade to what Volkholder has in its arms, but a more obsidian sheen could really help out the look and coloration of this line. Panther. If this line reminds me of anything, that would be Meowth. Persian always looked way too much like a cat to me, much like Panther looks too much like a cat here. Jaguile, it at least emphasizes a feature enough that it looks so outlandish it could only be a Pokemon, but Panther also doesn't allude to its spiky shoulders of its older form. If it did that, perhaps it would be easier for me to see it as a Pokemon. The alternate art that I found, where the coloration on its tail extends through its spine up to its head, and it keeps a gray and black striped color motif, I think would look so much better as an evolutionary line. As a final evolution, I much prefer it over Jaguile as it stands. The sickles on its eyes are much better defined. As it doesn't wrap around the eye, it extends from it. It shows intent, and its curled back ears seem to show it wanting to pounce at any moment. Eureka, a great name for a Pokemon inspired by the idea of a light bulb moment. I don't think that there's anything I could have changed in this line that would make it any better from my own creative standpoint. I do think that Eureka looks a little plain, but its complexity is more in the body shape itself, and I appreciate that all of its rounded edges is somewhat complicated by the jagged nature of the lightning it expels from its tubes. I gushed about it in my live reaction, but Cerebral's light switch, I believe it is, on the bottom of its body, is very creative, and I appreciate it so much. And the almost turban that it wraps around its head and electric hair make it look unique and almost mysterious. Perfect for a psychic electric. The Pepit line is almost perfect. Almost. I think that the only change I would make on this line is to be rearrange Pepit's coloring a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of that color green for the purposes of a baby Pokemon, especially when complemented with a darker shade of orange. However, the shape, the personality, and the mix between a stylized rabbit and different kinds of peppers themselves work out fantastically in this line. I still appreciate the little nubbin of a tail Hoppabnero has, and the jackalope features that Scovalope, the final evolution, portray. It also seems that Scovalope's antlers themselves seem to produce the peppers that it is inspired by. When it comes to alternate art, I am so glad that we have what we have. The top left, especially the baby form, seem to be more of a Digimon than a Pokemon. And I'm not a huge fan of the Patrat eyes that the middle two have. And I find it curious that one of, I think, Scovalopes in alternate art look more like a burned Leafeon, an interesting combination of a fire and grass evolution. It could be amazing, but I don't think it fits in a line by itself, and I'm so happy for what we got. Potter, this line still looks pretty adorable. Again, I think the only change that I would make would be coloration, as the two hues of blue, god that's a tongue twister, on Hurricanine look a little too similar. I would lighten it up just a bit, perhaps the majority color on Hurricanine's body being replaced with the same color that Potter has on its paws. Having that change of hue could help the yellow pop and keep the muzzle and paws a center feature for Hurricanine. As for alternate art, they were just kind of funny, as Potter seemed to be more of a poodle with giant shoulders and an ice cream hairdo. It looks adorable, but doesn't quite live up to the Labrador Retriever inspiration that this line has. And then Shark Dog looks pretty amazing, but I couldn't see such a chimera in the Pokemon world. Skull Larva. Skull Larva itself is such a wonderfully designed Pokemon. You can clearly identify which part of its head is its head, and that its bib also mimics the lower jaw of a skull. That, while keeping a simple leg shape and body, look absolutely amazing, and I could see it being in the newest version, Gen 9 of Pokemon. Its real-life inspiration looks really creepy, and it almost photoshopped. But I saw multiple images of this same bug with a very detailed face painted on. I might have to research more on this, but I wouldn't want to see that in the woods. However, Skull Larva looks cute enough that I would want to see it. Mascoon is still another rounded cocoon Pokemon, and I think those are overused, as in the first 3 generations we got at least 4, just from the top of my head. Its mouth design is pretty interesting, and I like the idea that it creates a mask in its cocoon that you can just barely see. But it looks too much like Cascoon and Silcoon to me. While Mortask is another moth Pokemon, I think it's interesting by itself. Its wings conveying a skull design, but keeping large pincers. When it comes to alternate art, I almost prefer Mortask's alternate design in the middle. However, the blues and yellows represented there don't quite fit the current iteration that we have, and I'm not sure that design would work as well without colors that contrast so well, something that's missing in these final designs. Vectel. I spent a lot of time talking about why this Pokemon should have been Steel and Electric, and a good part of me still thinks that it should be at least one of those, but I also appreciate that it's
Just poison.
but it's a mix between a digital virus and a scorpion's poison. I think it does a digital Pokemon way better than Porygon, because it more directly calls back to an interface that we have in the modern day, a computer mouse. A computer mouse's design is simple enough that you don't think about it immediately when you look at Vectel, while the USB stinger that one of the alternate art uses calls back to the real world just too much. I'm not quite sure what the pincers and tail on Vectel 2's design is supposed to be, and it looks a little bit overcomplicated, but it just brushes up against that line, and it's still wonderfully designed. More complex and more sharp edges than Vectel has in its first stage. A lot of the alternate art seems to change as to what poison is supposed to be represented as, and I'm glad that they went with this final combination of both concepts, both main concepts. However, I do find this twin tail Vectel in the middle to be pretty interesting. I would love to see a Scorpion Pokemon with two identical tails, and I kind of wish that Vectel 2 did this, but I'm still pleasantly surprised with how its final design turned out. Bowie and Scoobug. Their inspirations were not lost on me when I first saw these two, and though I prefer Scoobug's final design rather than Bowie's, they both look adorable, and despite being very different from each other, there's enough of a line between them that can help you remember what Bowie evolves into. The three arms that Bowie itself has do at least correlate to the tendrils that Scoobug has. The hues of blue and yellow used match up, and so that they may be different, they aren't Remoraid and Octillery different, and I appreciate that. Totter. Its design is overly complicated, and the images that I was getting from the fandom page had Lutrajet's final design on a white square, while all the others were transparent. It might also represent the mess that this line kind of is. A river otter is so adorable, but I think that this line overcomplicates its designs. I think it could have been cool if these mohawk that this line seems to have was changed into a spiny dorsal fin to make it look more fish-like. But I also really appreciate the different blues that the alternate art use for some of the fins around its face, especially Lutrajet. If it wasn't for Totter's very weird coloration in the rightmost alternate art, I would appreciate that more. I still find a problem with Totter's position, though. If it was more standing in front of its tail, I think that would help declutter the design by having a more magnified view on Totter itself, instead of having to zoom out to encompass the whole creature. Alpine really wears its inspiration on its sleeve. It is an elephant and a pine tree. I still think that Alpine itself shouldn't be in a combination of a pine tree, a fully grown pine tree, and a baby elephant. So part of me really likes the alternative design in the bottom left hand. Its rounded leafy ears show more of a baby form rather than the admittedly rounded spiky ends of a pine tree. This does seem to change the inspiration from pine to a more tropical, but that isn't such a big change as to alter the typing in any way. Some of the other designs are really intriguing. I have no idea what the bottom right is supposed to be, but Forusk's alternate is really strange, and I kind of like it. It has arms, and its snout have claws and extra mouths, extra orifices, something. And I have no idea what they're used for or what its inspiration is. And the bud that is
Alpine is pretty adorable, all wrapped up like a blanket. Platypow. I still absolutely love this little poisonous brawler. I'm glad that it was inspired by a specific art form, Muay Thai, as many other fighting types are inspired by variations in fighting styles. And though I do appreciate having a platypus with grappling arms, I think I prefer the straight-up boxer-looking take that Platypow and Platycow exude in their final art. Cuppy, another Pokemon that wears its inspiration on its sleeve, is just a tea set of sorts, a kettle and a cup. I do kind of think that the alternate art is cute, but the final art that we got is better. I prefer that the spout on Fiddlekish is more like a blowhole rather than a nose. And though it's hard to tell if Cuppy can hold anything in its body, the shape immediately brings to mind a cup. Perhaps even a saucer. Or a gravy cup. Shibalbat. Now in my first reaction, I had recognized the name of Xibalba, but I couldn't exactly place it, so I ran with the Indian Egyptian motif that I thought I saw. Makes more sense that it's Mayan, especially with the pattern on its chest, but having a bat inspired by a guard of the underworld, fire makes a little sense, rock not necessarily, though with statue form I guess I can understand. However, dark and ghost just seem to work well here too, perhaps more so than fire. Nobunata. I still think that someone was thinking of Nobunaga when making this creature, but the piñata inspiration is openly there. I find it interesting that the only alternate art this Pokemon seems to have is alternate colorations, and out of all of them, the final art does look the best in my opinion. I like that the body is a darker blue so that your eye still goes to it, because the rest of its body is made up of bright oversaturated colors, while other designs just have so much darker colors that your mind goes to the gold instead of the body. At least in the two examples that I give here. Cybex. I think this is an absolutely adorable line. A goat and a yak with spirituality I think is perfectly expressed in these designs. I absolutely love Nuru's circular antlers of sorts, and I'm glad that that seemed to be a motif in all of its alternate designs. Speaking of which, pretty much all of the designs are interesting and could have worked, but I think the simple coloration on Cybex, and that Nuru's horns are complex only near its face, are a great asset to the current final designs. Floger, I still kind of have my problems with. It still looks like a few flower petals taped or glued onto a frog, at least in Floger's case. Belotus looks a little bit more whole in its design. In the reaction video, I said that I'd be interested to see a blue version of Flauger, and I'm pleasantly surprised that there are coloration differences here. Sort of a new mechanic that I can only somewhat compare to Spinda's alternate randomized design in Gen 3, or seasonal variants. I appreciate the blue Flauger's design, if only because the darker blue extends to the outer rim of the flower petals and makes the design seem way more whole than its green counterpart. But I think that the main body is... that teal color is too saturated. I did a quick Photoshop to see if that would actually change something, and I think it did, though I got rid of a lot of the shading because of it. So here's my rough chain to Flauger. Despite it being so rough, I do think that the coloration is all that's needed to change in Flauger. Belotus's design still looks a little too cluttered for me. I'd probably get rid of the spikes on its extremities, maybe just keep the ones on its head and enlarge them a bit. Make it visually look like a bull frog, though that's just throwing ideas to a wall. Barowl is another design that I'm not so sure about. It looks more like a fighting type bird rather than a ground that even loses its flying type. I made mention that the wings kind of look clipped in this case, but I suppose that they are also matted thanks to its Pokedex. I would be interested to see if someone could design a alternate version where its wings doubled as a nest so that they were filled with sticks, stones, and it was also matted. Maybe that way the wings would look more damaged and thus render Barowl
grounded. It's just such a strange concept to have a bird not be flying when Doduo and Dotrio are flying typed. Some of its alternate designs are interesting, but much like a lot of the alternates, they don't scream Pokemon as much as the final designs does. Magowl, a wizard bird. But again, it doesn't fly, so it's a little bit strange. I find it particularly interesting that both Burowl and Magowl were inspired by horned owls originally, and yet I don't see that inspiration coming through in either of them. I do kind of wish that one of the two color variants in the bottom of the alternative art section would be a first stage to Magowl. It looks small and cutesy enough that it could work, though I think I would change the beard to something more fluffy and cloud-like. Plus, I think it'd be kind of funny to see a wizard become more of a monk. Cralibur and Craglock. Though their inspirations is listed as a bullet and a revolver, I really don't see the revolver inspiration in Craglock. It seems to be more heavily inspired by the pistol shrimp of the line. To be honest, I'm not sure how you would be able to show a revolver in the line. Perhaps it's most directly called out in the furthest left alternate design, but I find myself drawn... Oh, I said by the furthest right alternate design, but I find myself drawn to the furthest left, as having launchers for arms instead that can still open up like pincers looks like a pretty unique thing that this line could have. Leaffish. Initially, I was very hesitant to think too positively about this line, but after seeing the South American leaffish, I can understand its motivations way more. Watergrass works well enough because its design screams grass through its coloration and water through its form, but I think the grass typing could have been lost in that case and gained in chlorophyll, as it seems to be more of a dolphin wrapped in kelp, rather than a camouflage system that makes it look like a leaf. Would have been an interesting correlation with Artifish, but maybe after experiencing this, Artifish's gimmick would have seemed less unique. So I understand why it's water grass in more than one ways. But again, I really couldn't find much alternate art for this line. It seems that Pokemon Sage also took inspiration from the Pidgey and Sparrow quarrel that I seem to have perceived from the anime. It helps that these lines seem to have been inspired by each other. But in this case, their final evolutions look a little too similar in concepts, which really doesn't help it that both of them look like Braviary from actual Pokemon games. I think Quibble could have been a wonderful two-stage Pokemon if you left the third out. Perhaps you'd even be able to make a cutesy version of a baby Pokemon with a mohawk and leave Fawatl as the final. But Ho-Po birds themselves have wonderful coloration, and I'm glad that a line was able to take inspiration from that. That being said, I struggle to see Turkey in Turkistator's design. The Ceteraut final artwork that we have is absolutely the axe head that is on the head of both of these Pokemon really help show the stone influence that each take. And I truly appreciate the interesting colored sediment layers that Condessa has. Because I like the current design so much, it's hard for me to appreciate some of the alternate art, but this gendered line of seemingly dodos looks somewhat endearing and could be a separate line by itself, though I think the purple is too saturated on the final evolution. Cardinite. Being from Arizona, I truly appreciate a cardinal-inspired Pokemon, and I'm glad that Cardinite does look like a little bit of a brawler, someone who would pick a fight. I think its design is very simple and very endearing. While Chardonnel's does look tougher, I still think that the neck fluff and the head flame confuse each other with how close that they are. Perhaps the head flame should be smaller and more towards the tip of Chardonnel's head, rather than near the base of its neck. Its double eyebrows is a very interesting design choice, but with how eccentric Cardinites are, I think it really adds to the Pokemon. Skuro. Skuro's a very interesting Pokemon, as it's almost supposed to be designed to be useless thanks to Dunsparce. At least it's what I think, and what I've been getting from the community. And it's kind of hard to see the Mexican mole lizard inspiration, but this Pokemon seems to have some of the most interesting alternate art that I have seen. I like the armored Skuro,
in the top right. I like the Cobra-esque, intimidating Skuro in the bottom right. And I think that the bottom left could be a pre-evolution that works just as well. It's darker scales coming from all of the dirt that Skuro digs underground. But originally being born as a bright and beautiful Pokemon could work wonders in contests, if those really take a major part in the games again. Its final artwork is pretty cool. I still think that the tan and the blue just aren't meshing quite well enough. Though for a Pokemon that needs to live underground, it works and it conveys that very well. Sombrero. A sombrero, poncho, and a ghost. What an easy combination to make. I like that the poncho does convey a facial design thanks to the jagged lines that represent a mouth. And I believe that it's the collar that a ghost eye is poking through just underneath the sombrero. A slight problem I have is that the sombrero looks a little beaten and worn, but the poncho just doesn't show any wear and tear despite having edges that could have been easily ripped off. And I think that would have helped cement the idea that it is a ghost, if that's the case. I really wish I could have seen some other colorations of sombrero, because so many different ponchos and sombreros can have interesting colors, rather than just a gray and orange. Noxiel. An absolutely wonderful line, and I so much appreciate that they were able to use such bright, vibrant gases in such a unique form, but still convey poison and ghost. It looks so much more unique rather than a purple flying thing surrounded by green smoke like all the alternate designs seem to imply. It works absolutely wonderful for the final design, but I appreciate the break of a endothermic and exothermic reaction inspired duo, and the idea that a pre-existing item, a burn heal or frozen heal, would evolve a Pokemon is super cool, and I'm glad that they were able to get an alternative use out of a pre-existing item. Adamite. Much like Noxiel, I am very happy with the final designs that we got, though I think that Adamite's lines alternatives look pretty interesting. More interesting than Noxiel's alternatives. Though I don't think that they portray the electric type outright as much, having a slit eye that also shows the negative charge of an electron is super adorable. And I appreciate that much more than just having a red and blue mash design to show a whole atom. Orbitome's facial hair is a little bit interesting as well, as initially I thought it was magnetic dust, much like Probopass. I'm still not 100% clear on that, but I do appreciate how it's supposed to be a little wink towards Einstein. Squink. Especially with Squidrift's design, I could only think of One Piece. So, forgive the inspiration pictures here. They are both supposed to be squids. It was an interesting limitation to have both of these Pokemon unable to swim, and knowing that it's easier for me to see Squink as being mono-poison typed. Squidrift, the only change I would make is to lose its bottom legs. I like the alternative designs, almost phantom-like limbs that could help it land on the ground rather than having 4 legs jut out of seemingly nowhere. Squink itself still looks relatively plain and simple. Works fine for a baby Pokemon, but it also still strangely reminds me of Mario, and I'm still not entirely sure where that would come from. It has some Mario-inspired designs from its squids, but it's not exact. Borealis. An absolute top-tier pun, and a wonderful example of a natural phenomenon that hasn't been introduced to the game so blatantly. Aurorus does look somewhat majestic, but I don't think it encompasses the array of colors often found in an Aurora Borealis. So I'm very happy with how Borealis itself turned out color-wise. Its dark body giving much needed contrast to the bright, vibrant colors of its mane of sorts really adds to its allure. And having it be dark and psychic type is portrayed well through the cool colors in its mane and the darker colors of its body. Chelanite is super cool. I'm not exactly sure where I heard the name World Turtle before, but it is somewhat familiar to me. The idea of a majestic being living out in the middle of space, hiding out of the eyes of most creatures, is very alluring to me. Because of that, I'm very happy that they didn't go with a galaxy-looking design and more of a meteor design, so that this creature could look like it's just hiding in the asteroid belt. That being said, I find it very interesting the dark coloration and the galaxy in the topmost alternate art. If you were to explain or just say the word world turtle, that is more of what I would think of than asteroids. Magnetogre's design has soured for me a bit. Its chunky body doesn't quite portray the same feeling I get from looking at pictures of Magnetogorst. None of the alternative designs seem to be portraying that either. This might just be a concept that can't easily be represented by Pokemon. I think the design by itself looks fairly interesting. The idea of a dog collar design around a steel Pokemon looks kind of cute, and the addition of color through rust is always a welcome design choice, but its head shape and body just don't quite convey Pokemon to me. So it's a little strange to see it with such a design. Perhaps I would like something more akin to the left-hand alternate design, though I think that the fatter right hand is pretty adorable, and it could work with a few changes. But Minorak is a design that works without any changes. I find it absolutely adorable and is a contender for best bug in my eyes, only barely being beaten out by Joltik. Out of its alternate designs, I can easily say that its final is the best design. Its gem-like eyes and Miney helmet, coupled with the tarantula-inspired furry design, works so well in my eyes. Trencher retains such fluff, but also seems just as tough as a second evolution should be. I have even grown to appreciate the diagonal spikes on the drill of Trenchula itself, though thinking about the organics of a drill on a Pokemon is a very strange thought to be had. Podle. I don't think, especially after seeing the alternate art, I don't think many people can change my mind that Podle should have only been a 2-stage. Much of the art keeps Tricata and Terracotta the same, only changing coloration and the plant on its head. While Podle's design seemed to have changed quite a bit, and I much appreciate the rounder pot that it received. I think the difference in age between Podle and Terracotta would have been a great asset to this line. Much like removing a mythical second stage for Cacnea would have benefited that line. You wouldn't want a 3-stage Cacnea. I don't think that it and Cacturn are different enough to warrant it. Much like I don't think Podle and Terracotta are different enough to warrant Tricata. Pueblant. I really wish I could have seen some alternate art of this Pokemon. I would have settled for even just different coloration, mainly because I'm never too big of a fan of gold coloring on pretty much any design, so I would have loved to see the differences. But being Bug Rock, having a darker, almost impure golden color work very well for the design it's supposed to have, while still keeping a vibrancy that most Dia de los Muertos skulls have. I absolutely love the large amounts of contrast in the main body, as well as the almost cluttered design that absolutely call back to Dia de los Muertos. And design-wise, having a flat bug like Cahokinsect is welcome, as I don't think we have many of those. Cobrasket. Oh boy. I'm not a fan that the Pokemon only fulfills its name when it has performed an action. In an initial reaction to Cobrasket, it looked like it was wearing a hat. It's supposed to be a lid for when its body is coiled up in a basket shape. I would prefer if the tail at least showed some part of a basket at all times. You could have it be a slab to represent the bottom or a smaller body and a cylinder in its tail. Perhaps having a bell instead of a rattle at its end, and the snake could wrap itself in the bell or around inside the bell to complete a basket look. But just having a snake coiled up only portrays its name in one position, and I think it is a crutch for a design to do that. Charmbra, on the other hand, I think works pretty well. Its bulbous upper torso is very reminiscent to an echo chamber in the flute picture that I have up in its inspiration. And the air holes represented by the black dots on its back call back to the air holes of a flute. I think its inspiration is worn on its shoulder, on the creature, rather than the position the creature takes. So I appreciate Chambra much more. Cobrasket's only alternate design that I think I would have preferred more is the right-hand one that I have listed here. If the body was more of a rectangular prism shape, it could at least foretell the creature coiling up on itself, and having the basket head be more attached to the actual head of the Pokemon looks more interesting in my opinion. Kyrup looks absolutely adorable. Its design of a manticore/chimera creature is something Pokemon sorely needs, and I think that the colors work extremely well, even if I'm not a particular fan of the shade of orange brownish on the tip of Kyrup's ears and front paws. I think I would maybe change those colors and have Hieroglyph lose the saturation in its purple to show more of an age progression, but keep the saturation of the turquoise to have such a good contrast and show off its features just a little bit better. Necronite, another Pokemon I would have loved to see some alternate designs for, but I better understand why I think people like it so much. The idea of a Pokemon that doesn't necessarily look like a real-life creature does have some mystical appeal, and being that they are inspired by mystical monoliths, it does make a bit of a sense. Despite their non-anthropomorphic qualities, I do think that they should still show some sign of life, even if it's something akin to the dot in the middle of their glyphs moving around and acting like an eye, maybe even blinking, but maybe not. Just to show some sentience aside from floating in midair. That being said, I do appreciate the progression that Necronite and Gravelum have, even if it is almost rock become bigger rock. The second eye, the taller form, it does definitely show progression in the evolutionary line. And I do appreciate the little, almost scarf that Gravelum has. The wisp of energy gives a little bit more life to its design in my eye. Diluweed. Oh boy, I heard that this thing went through some changes, and from its alternate art, I definitely see it. That being said, I really appreciate the final designs that we got here. The only changes I would have would be swapping the colors between Diluweed and Pangolash's leaf aesthetic. I believe that Diluweed should have had a more consistent greener leaf all around, while the older Pangolash should show its age with discoloration. Many of their alternate designs look somewhat interesting. The Pangolash with large armor plates where it can roll up like an armadillo look very interesting, but Pangolin look cuter than armadillo, so I'm happy that Pangolash is at least inspired by that. Ignishell, a snapping turtle Pokemon that is not just water. Not water at all, in fact. Another contender for the fire-type starter. Or for another starter. Ignishell's progression, I think, is absolutely wonderful. The only question that I still have is why doesn't Shellicine have a yellow stripe by its eye like the other two evolutions seem to have? Perhaps you could also give Ignishell a smaller, thinner body plate made out of rock instead of steel, but it adds to the progression of the line that Ignishell doesn't have that at all, while Shellicine develops it and Flarapin reinforces it, each one spiking up their shell too. I believe that this line is top quality, but I don't think it outshines Kidling, so I'm glad it isn't the fire starter of this series, or this game. Desola, an eerie bird that decomposes. Super easy to tell based off of the art alone, and I appreciate that so much. The line itself is so creepy. I do kind of wish that Desola evolved into something that was more eerie and simple, much like it is by itself, but a dead bird line is so interesting that I'm happy that we got it. The only change I would make would have Voltergeist be a floating bird torso without legs. The idea that this ghost has inhabited this creature's body for so long that it's losing parts is something that intrigues me quite a lot. And the idea that Voltergeist is a vulture as well, a bird that hunts down carcasses, gives a little bit of irony that endears me more to this line. Dinkawink, a Pokemon whose name alone endears me to its line, and Donkey Wonker are adorable Dunkleosteus,
strong jaw fish of sorts, and their designs heavily convey that with the reinforced armor plating around its face and upper torso, leaving the back half to be more fish in design. The water rock type make this one very unique, as the shape alone seem to imply the rock type, with the limb-like appendages that Donkey Wonker has. They aren't necessarily rock-colored, but you get that from the shape alone, which I truly appreciate. It is a little harder to see on Diggy, but it can be there, along with the hints that the main body is such a hard material, almost like steel.
Calphites, another fossil that I'm not even going to try and pronounce. Okay, maybe I will. Paraceratherim,
an almost giraffe-looking creature with added strange horns blocking its eyesight that I still kind of have a problem with. I find that its alternate designs almost look better. Maybe not Calphite. Calphite's design can use work, but it is strong enough and unique enough to stand out on its own. But Idrolith looks bulky and unrealistic, even for Pokemon standards in my eyes. I much would have preferred one of the two alternate designs, as the armor plating on the leftmost looks really amazing, while the horns and tusks of the rightmost, along with the strange coloration of blue and yellow that still somehow call back to me rock ground, is so intriguing and unique. It helps that much of the texture on the rightmost just seems to be a rocky armor on its back, but still, the interesting use of color really draws my eye. Calphite, especially, both of these final designs need longer legs, Calphite especially, and a smaller tummy. It looks like one of those low-riding cars that can't go over speed bumps. Maybe it looks cool, but it's not practical, the way it's designed. Solakari and Arcari, or a toucan species. Its interesting color scheme of bright yellow, green, and red do bring to mind South America, or Central America, and I'm very happy that almost every alternate design kept that coloring, despite being a normal flying bird. Its strange opposing colors do convey that this bird isn't a specific type. It isn't yellow enough to be electric, it isn't green enough to be grass, and it isn't red enough to be fire. So somehow it meets in the middle and portrays normal. I do really like some of the other alternate designs. If it was something in another video game, where this could be some minor reoccurring enemy, I think I'd prefer the rightmost alternate design. But as a Pokemon, I think we got the best one available, despite all of them being fantastic creatures. Nursery, a classic example of taking a species name and exemplifying the qualities that it was named after. I absolutely love the design, and I'm happy that it's just 2 shades of pink on white. The colors are very simplistic, and yet it conveys everything it needs to. The addition of a nurse's cap does help the design a bit, and the curls associated with the Nurse Joy help portray nursing, especially in Pokemon games. Loneleaf and Forthorn. People or small creatures hiding behind masks, pretending that they're something that they aren't. Seeing Forthorn as 2 or more kids in a trench coat make the design less scary. Wanting to be accepted so much that you don a happy mask. Man, it's too real. The design is very nice once you understand that. Initially it's somewhat creepy, but I guess so's life in a way. Knowing that backstory, Ghost is a little strange, but Forthorn also seems to fly in midair for its final art. So in at least that case, it makes sense. I'm glad the mask isn't too intricate. Humans are portrayed as the more dominant species in the Pokemon world, and so basic crafting skills for Pokemon are expected. I'm glad they aren't master quality. I still find it kind of weird that Rillaboom has such an interesting and unique drum that comes out of nowhere. At least with Loneleaf, I could see it carrying around this mask kind of in a Cubone-esque fashion. Coultergeist. Ooh, I still love the design of Coultergeist itself so much, and Phantasmare is wonderfully designed as well. Its alternate art look somewhat interesting. In fact, maybe the middle stage could have been a more true representation of a pre-evolution for Phantasmare, but Coultergeist by itself is so cool and unique as it shows the inner bones of a Pokemon.
That and the design is very reminiscent
To the Galar variant of Ponyta, years before that Ponyta was even shown. And since horses were such a critical part in the Americas, in the story of the Americas, I am glad that they have such a strong representation in an American-centric
Chihaha. A very unique Pokemon.
that takes a European Joker Harlequin design and just adds it to a Dalmatian. A simple merging of concepts that work well with the strange colors of the Harlequin and the random spots of a Dalmatian. I am very happy with the designs that we got. The more joyful creatures rather than the more sadistic Halloween-esque Harlequins, more common these days, that you can see in the bottom right hand alternate designs. But there were a number of interesting variations on these happy dogs, like you can see in the middle. Though I prefer the long-nosed, almost greyhound proportioned Howlequin that we got. Chagrin, a Cheshire cat. Again, something a little bit happier, perhaps, than it could be. Cheshade, fulfilling a more demented version. I do think the design of both of these is very fantastic, and the simple addition of an extra tail does indeed show progression. Along with the more serious face of Cheshade, the claws that develop from its tail show that Cheshade can really defend itself when times are tough, while Chagrin seems to work more from charm than anything, which from a dog lover's perspective just seems like a cat's personality to me. Doppel. From the initial reaction, my stance on Doppel has probably changed the most. I completely missed that Artifish is a play on words of artificial and thus the normal typing. And the idea that Doppel's helmet can change to different Pokeball styles is so cool. And it's just a little variant that can add so much to a Pokemon's design. Despite being the mascot, seemingly, of Sage, I find Doppel's design a little bit simple, for my tastes at least. Artifish, I like a little bit more because it shows a little bit more flair. That being said, the different Pokeball designs really help Doppel there, because the top half of a Pokeball is very plain. But then you take a Master Ball and suddenly the design is more complex. All in all, a much better line than I originally thought. And I'm glad that there is something that is trying to trick at least more veteran Pokemon players. Thorax. I called this from a mile away when I first reacted to it, and that just really shows the strength of this design. A firefighting fire ant. I think it's wonderful. The final design looks amazing. Its legs look like it will stand up to whatever comes its way, despite being a blazing inferno that might stand in front of it. And the idea that this bug Pokemon can learn water moves is perfect for the hydrant on its abdomen. I find some of the other designs somewhat curious. You can more easily tell that the leftmost alternate design has an abdomen full of water, but I think that's more of a detriment than an addition. And the middle alternate seems to have tubes that it might shoot water out of on its head, which I think is an interesting concept, but I think I like the jagged antennae more. And then I really don't know what happened on the rightmost. It just seems to take an axe inspiration and make Thorax a logger instead, that somehow Tuliep is just associated with. It's kind of cute as fan art, but I don't think that would work for a final design. A good number of Pokemon just got deleted because of Audacity stuff, so I'm going to be a little quicker on these than I was on the previous Pokemon. Pomperunt. I absolutely love the design. The Pompadour is a great hairstyle to take inspiration from. I do think Pompagoon needs a more rounded hairstyle, and I think that Pomperunt could benefit from a longer looking jacket, where its arms cover up its feet entirely, slopping on the ground, like it's wearing a coat way too big for its own good. I am so happy that this line exists, as it seems like a gang that you would meet in the alleyway, snapping their fingers as they get closer and closer. You know that they can be threatening, but they don't mean necessarily super bad things are going to happen. Erikun. Inspired by red blood cells and red pandas. I am so happy that this Pokemon exists, and that it seems to carry packages to Pokemon throughout the ecosystem in which it lives, almost like a postal worker. Its final design is very adorable, and it seems like that white spot is where it stores all of the berries that you can just put your hand through, and there is where the bag in its tail is supposed to be. Its alternate art is interesting, but I'm very happy it doesn't have such a clear opening to its tail, as that's kind of a little weird. Plus, I much prefer the lines and splotches of color that the final design has. Liu-kun could learn from this, as its circular features do represent what its open mouth looks like. I think it looks somewhat dull. However, I do really appreciate the blank canvas that is its stomach now that I've seen its open mouth form, which, if the final design is only an outline of what the inner mouth looks like, I think that is super cool and unique, as even color itself cannot escape the depths that Liu-kun's guts can absorb. And then being influenced by trash pandas, raccoons themselves, is very fitting for such a devourer. Tuxedo, a great two-stage for one simple concept: mosquitoes. I love how Tuxedo's design is purely a full mosquito with blood in its abdomen, and evolves into something very its design much more jagged and complex, while still keeping the very clear inspiration of a mosquito in mind. Oret. The idea of a evolution in real life being represented in an evolution line in Pokemon is absolutely wonderful. A great depiction of what that word is supposed to mean. Magroplex could benefit from color variants on its body, as without its head it just looks like a snake. Perhaps an armored snake, but still just a snake. Anvilid looks a little bit too much like Aggron, but its sunken in eyes, darker lower body, and nubs for tail, or back legs, really help its design in standing out unique. Oret's design looks very cool and unlike anything we've seen in Pokemon thus far. Despite how much I like the left alternate art, I think it was best to go with this. Though the purple on its underbody is still somewhat confusing with the darker colors that the rest of its line has, it does make it stand out that much more and makes it a little bit more adorable with such a pastel color. VP. I had no idea what to talk about when I first saw this Pokemon. I had no idea what its inspiration was, and I had only the roughest idea that a random group of people came together and made this Pokedex in the first place. Now that I understand that it was a 4chan board called VP coming together to make this, its inspiration is absolute. In my eyes, it is more of a mascot than Doppel is for this game, but I was not part of the community that made this. I don't exactly know where the white comes from on its body, perhaps just being a blank canvas for what a mascot could be, but the blue and red represent a blue and red boards of 4chan, and I'm happy that this game isn't just ignoring the red board community that even the Pokemon company knows is out there. Chilloth and Sokoth. I absolutely love the design of a water sloth. It's something unique and I don't think about too often, so having a line surrounding it, amazing. Chilloth's design, I don't like how pill-shaped its body and head are. It looks like its arms are coming out of its face or lack of neck, so I much prefer the rightmost version of Chilloth than what we got. Though the Sokoth that we got, where it has a life vest rather than a life preserver, I prefer way more. And its sharp claws do more call back to what sloths look like than the claws that we get in the rightmost alternate art. Chayanne's design is almost like a upgraded and modernized Hitmonline in my eyes, as those Pokemon are very simplistic because of the graphical limitations of the first generation of Pokemon. These designs more take inspiration from the more modern designs of Pokemon that are more complex, and the inspirations of a mythical clay glove fighting warrior and Mayan sword clubs, I suppose, are very unique, and I love how they were integrated in these two designs. I love how sharp and angular Maku Warrior's design is to help contrast Asurumi's more fluid limbs. Fortify. I much prefer this over Magikarp and Gyarados. I was never much of a fan of cool-looking Pokemon necessarily. Gyarados just seemed cool to be cool. Orwish looks more regal, more divine thanks to the purple surrounding the golden crown it adorns, and the wishing star on its back, I suppose. Fortify leads into this by almost having a rusted crown and sunken-in eyes. You think that something's gonna happen to this Pokemon, and you are not disappointed when it evolves into Orwish. I am kind of curious about alternate colorations, like the rightmost alternate art, but I am very happy with what we ended up with. Smashieri is the final Pokemon that was deleted from the last recording I had. Its design is so much worse now that I have seen a Secretary Bird. I am so happy that the alternate art was at least trying to use the unique feathers that the Secretary Bird has, and I think that the leftmost alternate design portrays it the best, and would have been a better representation of it than the final design that we got. Its legs elongated and more represented of the type of combat Secretary Birds undergo, rather than the mixed wing and leg fighter that the current Smashieri portrays. I do think that if the left alternate art would be used, more definition and emphasis would be needed on the legs itself. The Slatic line. I absolutely love the designs of these Pokemon, and it's very interesting that they are only electric types. Something that is pretty easily portrayed by the colors in at least the first two. It confuses a little on the third, thanks to the strange shade of blue and green. But the jagged edges and lightning design on the back of its head really emphasize that it is electric. The design inspiration of a chameleon is much better represented than I think Kecleon's stage did, as its inspiration is very unique and can lend itself to at least more than a one-stage Pokemon. Its alternate art is somewhat interesting, but a lot of the design motifs that I appreciate in the final line are represented in almost every alternate art, so there isn't too much to say there. Glaucua, a Glaucus atlanticus, or sea slug, a highly venomous sea slug by the looks of it, gives a wonderful design of a winged fish to these two, Glaucua and Hydranticus. I do somewhat appreciate the alternate art on the left side, as it more directly calls back to the inspiration, but the feathered, fishy serpent that we got is such a cool design that is very Pokemon in my eyes. The bright, vibrant red contrasts very nicely with the darker purple that is both trying to hide itself from your eyes, but only helps bring out the darker shade in an otherwise saturated Pokemon. It does a little bit blend in thanks to the desaturation of the blue, which I truly appreciate, and Hydranticus. It's not just purely saturated and desaturated. Lintel. Oh my goodness, the Venezuelan poodle moth is so adorable, and I'm so glad that there's a number of designs that are amazing when it comes to Lintel's different arts. I think that what we got in the end is very simplistic and very Pokemon, perhaps Gen 2-esque, and I think that a number of the designs could have been introduced in Gen 4 or onwards, and I kind of wish that it was in that style too, as having a white, blue, and black bug Pokemon is very unique, other than the bright colored Pokemon that we ended up getting in the final line here. That being said, I absolutely adore this final line. The only change I would have is to change turquoise cyan color of one of the male versions to a darker blue. The changing color on the female line is very welcome and interesting, and I would want the same for the male version. Parapi. I hate this Pokemon only for the reason that it made me look up this tongue-replacing louse in Google Images. Other than that, I really like it. It's another disturbing take on a natural event I love Malwacyte's design, but I also feel like the alternate art where it's a creepy mutilation of a mermaid would have been really cool to see in a Pokedex too. So I had to include that alternate art in here. Malwacyte's almost lobster design is very cool, and it seems to be using the parts of Pokemon it's dissected and broke apart as outer shell, which is very interesting and disturbing if you think about it too long. Chimpoka, Simian, and Monkezuma, Aztec rulers and the Mayan culture in general represented through monkeys. This line is very cool, and I'm glad that it has the golden accents that the New World was almost characterized and colonized because of. I am also very happy that this line isn't using golden gauntlets like most of the alternate artwork shows, because it more represents that these Pokemon don't need extra weaponry to be strong. It is more of a fashion choice than anything. Unless you're talking about Monkezuma, which also their tail doubles as a mace, it seems. But that could just be more destructive power. It still looks like it could just break apart a building with its bare fists alone. The gradual change in hue and saturation from Chimpoka to Monkezuma is very cool and does show a age progression, along with obvious growth, and an acquisition of gold, which also shows a power scale between this line. The more gold that you have, the more battles you have won. Enigmite. Whenever I see Enigmite, I can only think of that ladybug Digimon, but it is a very cool design. A dung beetle that carries around a mysterious rock that, when the stone becomes smooth, it gains a crystal ball and psychic powers. Very, very cool, and seems relatively natural. I still think Enigmantis can lose its arm spikes, mainly because it looks like a mixed attacker that way, but if I'm not mistaken, its stats show a lean towards a special attacker rather than a physical. Some of these alternate designs are very interesting, the most strange of which I think is the bottom left hand, as it shows a floating Enigmantis with 4 limbs, almost in cardinal directions around this orb of power. But even with these interesting designs, I'm very happy that Enigmantis has a big brain time, and fulfills that cliche of sorts. It keeps the pink and dons blue and white, as a lot of psychic Pokemon do. Though its floating powers also convey that psychic power, it doesn't lose the bug typing, and its mantis arms only keep that in mind. Its shape being bug, and its color palette being psychic. Speaking of color palettes, RGB and Roy G. Beeve is how I'm deciding to say it, is a very interesting duo, and I love the idea that color dynamics is influencing a Pokemon's design. And being a fan of Eastern Dragons, both of these designs call back to that, a flying snake, and make me love it more. Though you could argue that Roy G. Beeve's name could be changed, I find its design absolutely spectacular. Having the white and black contrast on the main body while the real color is exposed through different fins and wings is very interesting and cool. RGB more calls to mind the floating rod phenomenon of the early 2000s when cameras had a much slower shutter rate. I think it's a very cutesy design and somewhat simplistic. I think the fins should have been a little bit bigger and the body maybe a little bit smaller. But aside from that, I love that it's influenced by RGB. So its head is just red, and while its fins are a combination of RGB. And if you didn't get it, Roy G. Beeve is a play on red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, violet. Barracuda line, influenced by a giant moray eel and a barracuda. I still think that Barracuda's back should have been the same color as its head, much like Jagodon. It would have brought together the design a little bit more rather than seeming like the head should be by itself, maybe separated by something else. But the giant jaw on it does make it look threatening, and Barracuda's design does simplify that enough that it looks pretty adorable. I do think Jagodon's pose in the Pokedex could use some work, and I particularly like the alternate art on the right hand side where it has Jagodon almost wide stance T-posing, as it attacks an enemy trainer or Pokemon. That'd be amazing to come across in a battle. Very threatening. The T-pose makes me cower in fear. Drosire.
It has very interesting inspirations, but its designs are too similar. I think that Drosire could have been a single stem using the red bulbs as its headwear. Then two Drosire can evolve into one Sunduke and develop a leafy headdress instead.
So its final evolution could have stayed similar, but its first evolution would have only been that stemmed, almost vine whip looking extremity it has, but having the bulbous pink spots be the headdress instead. It would have made the designs look connected, but different enough that it just doesn't look bigger. It's similar to the problem I have with Voltorb and Electrode. It's just the same design, but different, slightly different. I really would have appreciated some alternate art, but this was again another Pokemon that I couldn't find any other art for. It would have been real to see other artists' interpretation of Sunduplans and Mesoamerican headdresses. Whisburn and Fanturn. Very Pokemon. It's an object inhabited by a ghost, and most of its artwork seem to be just what part should be lantern, what part should be ghost. Some of the shading's different in coloring too, but with what we got, I'm very happy. The orange and purple are very directly opposed in the color wheel, and for a reason they contrast each other very well. This is an interesting case where the baby Pokemon does work better as a more structured form, because despite it being more jagged, there is less shapes to work with, while the second evolution has a central body that is just a circle. It has very wispy clouds that complex the shape, along with ribbons and tassels that add to the complexity of the design, while Whisburn only has one and keeps the design relatively simple because of that. Speaking of complex designs, Glocto and Lavoon, lava lamp inspired bioluminescent jellyfish, and a blue whale. I love the fact that these are water fire, as the only other Pokemon we have like that is a legendary, so something more common is very cool. And having a lava lamp that also call back to underwater heat vents, I absolutely love. Orange and blue contrasting each other very well to be able to bring your eye to what is important and unique about the Pokemon. The limbs of Glocto and inner head that some see-through squid and jellyfish have is very unique and cool. I also love how this line completely changes species entirely, but because it keeps the same coloring and same lava lamp inspired idea, you can understand the connection between the two despite being so different in the real world. Some of the other art tried to play with this a little bit, but ultimately I much prefer the design and coloration that we got in the final art. The Gila line. I absolutely love that it's taking inspiration from different lizards. A Gila monster, a horny lizard, and Ankylosaur. Ankylosaur being a dinosaur from olden times. You know, olden times. And my favorite dinosaur in general. Since I was 4, I liked the Ankylosaur, and I've been dying to see Pokemon added into its decks. I think that Pokemon Sage did it extremely well, and having it be poison ground is very interesting, rather than the rock or steel I was expecting thanks to its plated armor. And having the horny lizard that can splurt blood out of its eye, using that blood as a reference to Ankylosaur's red faceplate is an absolutely brilliant move. I love everything about this line. Basilisk. Much like in my first reaction, I think Ornithurb is just too similar to its final evolution. It would have been fine as a 2-stage. And that being said, it is very hard to make a Pokemon go from walking on all fours to crouched over like a Velociraptor or T-Rex and have its position move somewhere in between that in the interim. It would have to rely too heavily on the design itself, and since this design doesn't evolve too much between Pokemon, Ornithurb falls apart because of it. The only standout alternate art I could find is a more realistic take on Dilophlora, which looks pretty cool and I would love to see colorized eventually. Baboon, a very interesting concept. A Cape Baboon in Thunderstorm. I think it could have worked well, but all of the designs that I found relied too heavily on the color red. It confuses the design. It's supposed to be a storm, electric dark, but the red makes it look more like a hero costume than an expression of what type it's supposed to be. Because of that, you can tell that it's supposed to have dark clouds, but it seems like dark plus something, or electric, but not dark electric, purely because of the addition of red. I would change that to a darker blue. Darker than its body, probably less saturated than its body. Maybe not, that's a little much as it is. But I'd get rid of the red entirely. It's a unique thing on Cape Baboons as it is, but it's just confusing the design in this use. Isotope. The Pokemonification of nuclear winter. I love how it has the radiation symbol on both of these mon, and that Chilnoble has a nuclear plant on its back. This glob still does remind me of the elephant's foot, or radiation melting stuff as it is. Seeing Chilnoble with a closed mouth is a little interesting, as its eye becomes an overbite of such, hanging off the upper jaw in front of the lower jaw, while keeping the snail eye stalks as ice chunks on its body. Unique, and I much prefer it over the alternate art that we got, even though they are somewhat interesting themselves. Wendigo, a lovable dog, and a great representation of Pokemon making creepy stuff that much more child-friendly, especially in Carnival's case. You can see in that inspiration artwork of a Wendigo. A little bit more bloodied and beat up than Carnival really shows. I find it interesting that a lot of these two were designed with spirit gates in mind, very Japanese inspired, but I'm happy that it's more plain. They look more like natural creatures that would emerge rather than creatures that also have a job. Kind of a problem that I agree with for some of the more modern starter Pokemon. It's weird to see a flock of shaman or a flock of soccer players, because what else would they do? Luchito and Eluchadon. I still think that these are amazing design. These seem more like fans of wrestling than wrestlers themselves. They might don these masks, but it's more of a personal aesthetic that they keep up. The fighting type represented in their posing and the inspiration of luchadors as it is. And the electric type coming in through their spiked blonde hair make these donkeys look very rough and tough. And this was one of the few Pokemon that had a line of inspiration from their first design to its final. And I am very happy once the luchador inspiration came into play. This donkey fighter came into its own around then, in my eyes. Grolem is a little bit weird. The only inspiration I could find would be the robots from Castle in the Sky. Ancient mechs, covered in moss. I love the idea, and having an ancient civilization is not unique in the Americas at all. I'm planning on having something like that in my South Arizona-inspired Pokemon game. The incorporation of blue on top of the gray stone that it's built on. Green grass does give added color to what would otherwise be a pretty bland coloration, and I'm very happy for the addition. The alternate art really wasn't that different, but it was just more stylized, so I thought I'd include it. The Larvin line, Beetle Dragons. Again, bringing to mind Digimon, but the larva itself is a chunky boy that is simple enough to be a Pokemon bug first stage that I haven't seen quite yet. It's a little bit fatter than most other bug Pokemon that I see, and I am so incredibly happy that Dracoon isn't just a cocoon. It looks like it would at least be able to move around. In fact, I thought for a while that it was eating an apple when I first saw it. And then Basilect. Having such a big and imposing Pokemon at the end of a line is always nice to see, and something that bug Pokemon do exceedingly well by themselves. It being dragon, just an added cool aspect. I also thought I'd include this alternate design where Dracoon looks almost like Samus. Carbite. Again, I love the design, the inspiration's really cool. I still have a problem with pressurized coal being turned into a larger diamond dragon. If you're going to put coal under pressure, wouldn't it get at least smaller? It wouldn't get bigger and become a big dragon. It would become smaller than it was before, I would think. In that way, I kind of prefer the very bottom right design where the diamond is encasing a carbite, so it's almost like two carbites fused. But the design of Diamat is very cool, but unless it's maybe 2 feet tall and Carbite's 3 feet. It's a sticking point in my mind and I can't get it out. It's a bias I just seemingly can't get rid of. Despite Carbite and Diamat looking really cool. Pressor, it looks a little plain to me, and it reminds me of another Cocoon Pokemon. But it looking like a human heart is kind of interesting. However, you might be able to get rid of it as a whole, just from the constant barrage of hits that Carbite has, pressing the coal in its body to become Shining Diamond as it progresses in life. I think that'd be pretty cool. Quecco and Tozeko. I absolutely adore. I already mentioned that I love the Eastern Dragon aesthetic. Not having wings and being able to fly through the sky, very amazing. And the gecko coloring works well with what this dragon evolution had. I absolutely love the coloring. The yellow isn't something that I would often like on any other creature, but it mixed with the vibrant green and toned down red especially work well on Quecco, and the spines and fangs on Tozeko does make it look more threatening. An almost sickle-like tail really add to that aesthetic. Crackling and Fuelong. I really, really appreciate how Crackling starts off as red and Fuelong ends up blue. It's such a stark contrast between the two, but its inspiration is so blatant that the connection is still made. Much like Glocto and Lavoon. The fire represented on its tail, I think, is a better call-out to what its inspiration is rather than Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard. I do think some of the alternate colorings of Fuelong being just red and gold, much like the most common Chinese colors, would look pretty cool. But like I said, the change into a turquoise blue make it look and stand out that much better. Dragar and Ragnarok. A very interesting combination of dragon boats inspired by Nord history. You won't immediately think about a boat when you look at Dragar, but you can tell that something's off there. But when it evolves into Ragnarok, you can tell that its wings are supposed to be the mast of a ship, and that Dragar's limbs were supposed to be oars of sorts. Its water and dragon typing make this thing look pretty dang cool as a combination. And I appreciate Ragnarok's final design more than its alternate art that I had here, but it was unique enough that I thought I should add it. Having Dragar have 6 legs from the start too is an interesting choice, but I prefer the progression of 4 to 6 legs as it gets older. The eras. These somewhat Reggie clones are actually pretty cool. To describe major eras in human history, from the Bronze Age, Industrial Age, to the Space Age, is a very interesting concept, and having each be 4 times weak to Earth is very interesting. Very interesting. I had one comment say that it was a constant that Earth would always overtake humanity's industrious nature. I do like the consistencies between all 3 of these in the final designs. The idea of 1, 2, and 3 eyes as the ages progress is a nice change. And with the alternate art, I'm surprised how much of the Bronze Age was represented by Greek and Roman armored plating. I much prefer the more generic bronze-made Pokemon that we got here. And then this trio. I didn't ever see a name for them, so I kind of nicknamed the Phantoma trio. I love the through design of a hole in the middle of their chest. Seems like something's missing. Yet, 2 are represented by goddesses, and only 1 seemed to be represented by a folk tale that is truly missing something. Patama, the Incan fertility goddess, represented here by nature. Machima, the Great Mother, flying ghost, who whisks intruders away from the desert. And Yakuma, La Llorona, a bad omen for sailors, and polluting ships are unlikely to escape its wrath and return to shore. I think each take their inspirations and run with it in a great degree, yet keeping their own individual charm. I think Machima's is my favorite because its simplicity is not overbearing, and the hole in its heart represented by a swirling fabric of its torso, along with its trailing off tail that are reminiscent of a tail itself, is very interesting. And its 3 different colors of white, yellow, and blue is all it needs in its design. Quetzar. Much like Giratina, this thing has 2 forms.
a statue form and a space form, instead of a altered and an origin form. In the Pokedex, Quasar is only represented in its statue form, which didn't
Make it look too much like a legendary, especially a box art legendary.
but its space form.
Form is very intricate, with the nebulas represented in its vast wings. I find this design amazing, and I definitely can tell that it's my bias towards the color purple, as it is a beautiful shade that changes hue the closer you get to the tips of its wings, or the bone of its wings. Its inspiration of a Quetzalcoatl
Is also represented in Quecco's design, but it really runs with it here, showing the
vast knowledge that Quetzalcoatl would have in its seeming knowledge and understanding of space itself. Xochi and Zotek, the only two Pokemon in Pokemon Sage that I
didn't see a dex entry for. They seem to be inspired by Xochiquetzal, the goddess of fertility, beauty, and femininity, associated with plants and flowers,
little strange for a fire type,
and Zotek, an Aztec god, associated with renewal.
rebirth, and corn.
I guess corn can come through in the golden design, rebirth, perhaps in the light, but truly I think renewal and rebirth being represented by purified gold, which I think stand out as the best out of these two forms.
I do think that the rightmost Xochi alternate art is pretty adorable, but I'm very happy with what we got in the final form.
I do genuinely think that
Zotek is a better mythical. It keeps the larger head to a smaller torso that most mythicals have, while Xochi seems to elongate its body to make it a little more of an usual Pokemon than a usual mythical. But each have a unique aspect and unique coloring that make it stand out. I wouldn't expect gold to be matched with green and red so much, and I wouldn't expect the red to be paired with an orange and then a turquoise. It's very strange, but I love them both.
So, that was a heck of a video, wasn't it? Scripted content, even remotely scripted, took a lot more time than I expected. Those little screenshots that you saw, oh my goodness. I thought it'd be so much easier. Maybe get those out in an hour or two, but that'd be about one every 30 seconds, and that didn't happen for sure. So, a couple things. I'm going down to 2 videos a month. Now that COVID's done, I have a job again, and that's very nice. But I'm spending a lot of time working on videos, and I would prefer to do it on my game. But if videos end up being an opportunity, I'll take that up if I can. So generally these 2 videos per month, not every other week, but 2 videos per month. One will be an update on the game, and one will be something else. So if you have any ideas of what I should do, maybe other Pokedexes I should review. I know I've got one that I want to once the dex is complete. I'll do that, and I'll either do a straight up review kind of like I did for the initial reaction of Sages, or I can try and do something more scripted like this if you guys want that, if you prefer this. Another thing that's generally going to be the case, but next month I am hoping that I can also get an additional Kickstarter video for my game up next month, so I can start a Kickstarter and gauge the interest of a Pokemon game that is more open world. If you are interested in that, or interested in influencing where I should take mechanics and what art style I should be using for the game, I would greatly appreciate that. The setting, kind of similar to Pokemon Sage, is set in the southern United States, so there's going to be a lot of similar references. And it's going to be set in the 1900s, something where the people will be more active and hopefully more in charge of their own destiny, as the states were still kind of forming down here. And it's shortly after the Civil War, so tensions are still somewhat simmering, along with the Apache Wars coming to an end. It's a lot of events that are meshing together in that sort of era, and I think it'd be a cool setting to have a game in, especially one that's about Pokemon, and I can show all sorts of different references and the beauty of the culture down here. If you like what I've been doing, if you want to support me, I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you want to see more content like this, please let me know. I'd be open to it, but not to the extent that I've been releasing Pokemon Sage. It's a little too much for me to handle, especially now that COVID's kind of dying down and, well, not really dying down, but the lockdown is dying down in Arizona. So let me know. I hope you all have a great day. Have a good night.